Hello, YouTube. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining me for another Chit Chats with Git Cats. I'm pretty happy with my guest today because I went to the Melbourne Guitar Show last year and there was a couple of standout builders. One of them was Ernie Taylor, and it wasn't just me that picked up on how great his work is. Guitar... What was the company, mate, that picked you up as the NAMM 2020? It was Premier Guitar. 2020 NAMM picks was ET Guitars from Australia, and I have with me Mr. Ernie Taylor, so please make him feel welcome. Ernie, hey Ernie.
G'day there, Rick. Always good to talk to you.
You too, mate. Mate, you must be chuffed about that to get that recognition, especially from such a big show like NAMM. Were you expecting that?
Oh, no, not at all.
Not at all?
Well, especially not first time there. Like I basically very first time, not sure what to expect at NAMM, and I went there with a new product as such, and they seemed to like it, yeah. So,
and I much deservedly so too, mate. As I said when I played your guitars down at the Melbourne Guitar Show. How the hell do you get the action solo, mate? That was my first thing. It was like, I just can think what I want to play, and it's happening. No effort whatsoever. Is there a trick to that? What's the go there, mate?
It just comes down to having a good level fretboard and getting the most out of the neck, getting it as accurate as you can. There's a few little tricks and bits and pieces. And often I find that I have guitars sometimes come back to me, even if they're interstate, they'll come back to me for the same setup as it had when I shipped it to the customer first, because they just don't seem to, as it moves around and as they change strings and do things, they sort of send it further away from what my initial setup was, and they go, and then they're pretty chuffed again when they get it back, and I've got it back to where it was, when I first sent it to them, and It's quite a fine balancing act, isn't it? It's a number of things that all come in together that you got to work with, and as you said, woods shift. Different humidity, different heat, and they're going to move. So that's something that you do. If people want to send their guitars to you, you can get them back to playing the way they left the shop. Absolutely, yeah. I've got one coming back from Melbourne today. A fella wants to change the tuning on a 7-string, sort of a very low tuning on a 7, and actually one of my endorsees, and he's sort of in a pickle because none of his local guitar stores are open for a setup or whatever. So he'll just send it back to me. It'll be a couple of days turnaround, all good,
Yeah. Cool. So, mate, what got you into this? So you obviously, did you start as a player and just try to create your own instrument? How did the whole ET guitar story start?
Yeah, it's going back a while. I've always been tinkering with guitars. Not a great player. I just love my hair metal and 80s metal and all that sort of stuff, and 70s rock and all the good old stuff. And I always used to love that and jam along with that, as a kid, and played a little bit in bands, sort of high school, university years. But after that, life got in the way for many years, and then I just sort of rediscovered guitars again, particularly inspired by Steve Vai and his Ibanez series of guitars. The Gems. Yeah. So back at that time, because when I was a kid, I could never afford a Gem, obviously. They were, even back in the late 80s, early 90s, they were expensive guitars.
It's still the dream for me, mate. One of those floral pattern Gems is like, whoa, if I had the cash. Yeah,
and so I always wanted to get one, and then afterwards, when I could afford it, I eventually did get one. But then there's with the Ibanez community, or the Ibanez Gem guitars, it's got such a following, and there's so many people who like to modify their RGs or make sort of customized Gems. It's out of all the guitar brands, that seems to be the one where people tinker with it and customize it for themselves, quite a bit.
Yeah.
And not normally just colors, often quite a few changes to the guitar itself, with hardware and so forth. So that's what I got into as well. I just wanted to have a Gem that was sort of more for me, more customized. So I went down that path.
Yep.
This was sort of like in the early 2000s, and it turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. I thought, okay, surely someone in America or whatever can build bits and pieces, and I found some people who could do it, but it was taking a long time. It was quite expensive. So I thought, this is, so I thought I'd either go myself, and so that's kind of where my guitar thing started, where I just wanted to literally just for myself make a my own customized Ibanez Gem style guitar.
Cool.
And I did about 2 or 3 of those in the early days, and they were the ones that I started out with and offered as a sort of a custom for others. And that only came about because others were asking. When I posted it up on some forums, as you do, you're proud of your little guitars and stuff, and so you show them on forums. And some people came back to me and said, "Oh, that's really cool. And have you considered doing any others? Because I wouldn't mind something just like that too." And so I thought, I suppose. And so then I've got a few of those coming in. So people are sending me a couple of guitars and stuff to swirl paint, with the Vi Passion and Warfare type.
Cool, yeah.
And so that was something I was obsessed with for a while in the early days, trying to work out how you do that swirl painting artwork.
That looks like fun, dipping it in.
It's fun, but it's so frustrating. It's one of those things that it took, I don't know how many hours and dollars I've put into that, honestly, just to try and get that sort of that artwork down. And I still haven't got it down, but I'm obviously happy with what I can do now. But after many years, it's just one of those obsessive things. So I was doing that, and then I thought I need to, I was getting so obsessed with the whole thing. I started looking at making my own bodies that I could then swirl paint or custom paint.
Cool.
And then I kept going further back again to necks. And so my business started, and it wasn't really a business. It was just a little sideline hobby at the time, sort of around 2006, 2007. And I was just starting out with that. But then in a couple of years, I sort of wanted to branch out more and offer my own designs, because I had a few designs in mind that I wanted to sort of offer around. And that's how I started. So officially, it was during 2009 that ET Guitar started.
Okay. It seems to be a pretty common story, that where people start doing stuff for themselves and then others like, oh, you do one of those for me, and it sort of just expands from there. So very common story. Now
it seems to be.
Yeah. I was the same with getting into production a few years ago. I had a 4-track, was doing things at home, and people were like, hey, you do one of those for me? And yeah. Now you mentioned the Swirl paint jobs.
Yes.
And how frustrating that is. If you ever do a dip, and if people don't know how they do it, how do you do it? You explain it, mate, because I have never done it, and I'm not going to make shit up.
Sure. Well, in principle, it's a very simple process. You basically get a big tub of water, and then you float paints on the top, and you mix them around, so you get those weird sort of psychedelic sort of mixture of colours, and then you literally plunge the guitar through the water surface, and then you effectively 3D print onto the surface of the guitar. So whatever the pattern is on the top of the water, you kind of get that printed, sort of like hydrographics, if you've ever seen that process at all, where they're doing car rims and various things. It's basically the same process. So you've got literally that film of paint on the surface of the water, and then you literally 3D print that effectively onto the surface of the guitar. And people could never work out when they first saw Vi's guitars. They thought, how the hell is it sort of some sort of a plastic mix and all different coloured plastics that are all moulded together? No, it's simply just the paints mixed up on the surface like that. And it's all very random. It's a completely random process. And it's way trickier. It's way more of a art than a science.
I know Vi went as far as actually donating blood into the paint jobs for a while. There was the DNA series, and the red in there is actually vials of his blood. Did you know that he did that?
Yeah, and it wasn't a small amount. They extracted a bit of blood out of him, actually, because there's quite a few guitars they needed to do, and so they mixed a little bit of his blood into each little container of the red paint. So there's I think 2 reds. There's one that was a bright red, and another one that was a darker red that had his blood in it. And
classic. So you mentioned the frustration of doing those paint jobs.
Yeah.
If you do a dip and it comes out and you go, oh, that's crap, let's try again. Yeah. Is that doable, or are you stuck with what you've got with the first dip?
There's a few little secrets here, but I don't mind divulging a couple of things. Depending on what paint system you use.
Yep.
If you use one certain type of paint system, you're really sort of stuck with it, and then you're going to have to let it dry, and then you have to sand it all back and start again. Okay, and so that's a lot of time. It's in between drinks there. Some other paint systems you can actually kind of wipe off. Like if you're not happy with it, you kind of wipe it off, or you kind of let it dry first, and then you wipe it off with solvents, and that which then doesn't affect the base coat. And so, depending on which paint system you use, you can maybe do a quicker turnaround, have another shot at it like the next day or something, or you got to go and sand the harder paint off, respray the primer, re-level it, get it ready again, which will be a good few days. And
it's never as good as the first go. They're never as good. I had a go at dyeing a body that I put together. Actually, it's right behind me there. I'm wireless, aren't I? One sec. This was a dye job that I did and then sanded it back, and I wasn't happy the first time around, and sanded it, re-dyed it, and then sanded it to leave it to pop the flame, and it was like, oh, it was better the first time. And that's always really frustrating.
It's often like that, isn't it?
It is. It's like recording demos. You hear that thing of people, well, we flew in the first verse.
I wish I never touched it.
Yeah, we flew in the first verse from the demo because we just couldn't get that vibe again. And yeah, that does happen. Now, Ernie, I had never played a multi-scale guitar until I played your one. I think it was a Katana. Was that the model that I had here?
Actually, is this the one? This is the one you had, wasn't it?
That's the one, man. That is just the slickest guitar I've ever played. I'm not really much the shred guy, but that was just think it, and you didn't have to put any effort into playing it. Just came out.
Yeah, Multiscale is an interesting one, and it's something that I'm helping to put people onto and sort of expand their guitar sort of playing experience a bit. There's a number of other companies quite involved in it now. A lot of the major brands are getting right into it too, because of the amount of market that it's taking up now. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing people like Jackson and ESP and Ibanez. They're all sort of starting to introduce their multi-scale models too. You've got a few other brands that actually really marketed it heavily and kicked it off, like people like Ormsby, for instance. It kind of happened by accident for me, or more so, not accident, but more like from the customer base, basically. And I kind of got requested into it, more so to speak.
Okay.
The very first multi-scale that I made was actually a ghost build that I was making for an Australian client of an American guitar company.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was sent the design of this particular guitar. It was like a headless multi-scale from an American company, and so I built that. And I'd never played a multi-scale before. I'd never built one. It was like, here's the plans, and make it. And so I was working with the customer here in Australia with the choices of timbers and various things like that, but the design was pretty well fixed. And so I built this thing, and then I looked at it, and I'm like, okay, so how do you play this thing now? I picked it up, and I was very surprised. It was actually quite there was nothing really to get used to. It was like quite comfortable to get straight into. Like, it was obviously a little bit different, but you get your head around it quite quickly. So within a few minutes, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, it's a little bit different how you got to hold your how you on your fretting hand. It's a little bit, you got to move your things around a little bit differently, but otherwise it felt really quite comfortable. And so that was my first go at it. And then afterwards it was more from customer inquiries and demand to start looking at it quite a bit more. And so from that, I did experiment quite a bit, because obviously, you've got limitless options. I mean, how do you stagger the frets, and what scales do you use, and at what point do you put your perpendicular fret, your normal fret, so to speak. So depending on where you position that on the fretboard, will determine what the angles are either side of that. You know what I mean? So, for instance, if you look at this, I usually use around the 7th or 8th fret. Now, I don't know if it's very obvious there. I'm trying to hold it really parallel.
I can see, yeah. It looks
so
like
right about
the 7th.
About here should be quite vertical.
Yeah, the one.
If I hold it, I'm trying to hold it really parallel there. So
yeah, it's a toss up between those two. You can see they're very close. Yeah.
So the 8th is the one I normally use as the perpendicular fret, and so on either side of it, on the nut side and also on the bridge side, okay, you then get the stagger or the angling of the frets. And so I tried a few different options just to see which felt good. And so the one that is on this particular guitar is the one I use pretty much most of the time for 6 strings, unless somebody wants something else. But this is the one that I find most people seem to like. They sit down with it, and almost immediately they feel quite comfortable with it.
Well, I didn't have to adjust. That was my first impression was, how do you play this? And I actually think it was probably one of you guys that said, just don't look at it. And I didn't look, and I went to do a bar chord, I went to do an F, and I went, oh, wow, I didn't realize, but my hand actually goes on that angle. So in terms of ergonomics, and I've had a bit of trouble with tendonitis over the last few years, and I couldn't put that guitar down, mate, when I had it here.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing I'm trying to put across, that there are some benefits to it. It's not some new little trick or fad or something. It's actually got so many benefits to it that people really need to have a closer look at it.
Yeah.
If you get the Multiscale in the sort of a comfortable format, let's call it in that way, it does actually give you a lot more endurance and a lot less pain, especially if you're a sufferer of pain. If you've been playing like yourself for quite a few years, you may develop some tendonitis or some carpal type issues. What the Multiscale tends to do is it tends to take out some of that fatigue and the movement of your wrist. You have a lot less, so you probably, I don't know, maybe a factor of 5 or 10, or who knows, I don't really know, but it basically takes out some of that extra wear and tear on your wrist. Not so much your fingers, but just your wrist. And the reason for that is, and it was actually best described to me by one of my endorsees, a young fella down in Melbourne. He loved the Multiscales immediately when he tested them out. He went to a music store, fiddling with guitars as you do, and he picked up an Ibanez Multiscale, and he said right at that point in time, we had a guitar commissioned with me to make for him. He's like a new custom guitar for himself, and he said, okay, we've got these plans for this guitar, but any chance we could maybe do it as a Multiscale? And I said, yeah, we could certainly do it as a Multiscale. And then he said, any chance we could do it as a Multiscale with a trem as well? And I went, I don't think that exists. I don't think there's any hardware.
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky.
There's actually no hardware that can do it, like not into the normal sort of fretboard format. Other companies have tried to do it by using a normal Floyd and then stagger all the frets in the other direction and just use a sort of a small change in the scaling. But then that kind of defeats the purpose, where down this end, you really want the frets to be angled in that way so that your fingers follow it when you're playing, sort of you're soloing in this area.
Yep.
And if you don't have the hardware, then you can't actually do that. You can't actually angle the frets like that. They need to sort of be straight or angle in the other direction quite a bit more. So
well, aren't we lucky that there is a chap that builds something that is accommodating to that? And he's actually in the chat room right now.
That'd be Remco.
That'd be Remco. I would imagine. Yeah.
So I ended up building some guitars only because I was able to find the hardware to do it, and that was with Remco of Apollo Music Parts. So let's give Remco a bit of a shout out.
Yeah, shout out to
So good on Remco for this design. Now, as you can see on this guitar, that's the one you played, right?
Yep.
So that bridge there is the Apollo. It's actually a headless bridge, would you believe?
It just looks cool. I went to rip a still frame from a video that I used that guitar in, and unfortunately it had my logo in the way of the bridge, and I did my best to try and remove that to show off how cool that bridge looks. And if you look closer, you can see a little imprint of my logo through it. But yeah, it does look very cool. Now, one thing that I noticed as to why your guitars might play as good as they do, and I've noticed this, guitars that have a 0 fret, and I just noticed as you held that up then that you've got a 0 fret. Do you think that goes a fair way in getting a nice consistent action?
It probably helps in some ways. I can tell you the reasons why I use a 0 fret. I mean, firstly, I like the fact that no matter what you're playing, every string will sound the same because everyone is touching a metal fret. Okay, so if you've got an open chord that you're playing, it still sounds all consistent with, on every note. It's something that you may not always notice, but when you've got like a normal plastic or a bone nut and you're playing open chords, some strings will sound a bit brighter than others, and then people don't really understand why that is, and it does come down to simple things like that. With a 0 fret, everything's always going to sound the same because everything's always fretted. Secondly, you've got quite a bit of control on the action, because obviously you can put in a fret as the 0 fret of exactly the right height, so you can control exactly what action's going to be over the first fret and then further down. So, if you want, you can use the same size fret as what all the others are, and then you've got that good. Because think of it this way: it's just like putting a capo somewhere. Okay, so it's effectively you do have clearance over all the other frets, even if you used a 0 fret that's the same size. I tend to use a 0 fret that's a little bit bigger, so then I can actually sort of skim it down a little bit to exactly the height that I want it to give exactly the right clearance. Obviously, with the 0 fret, it's very important to use something very hard and very slow wearing, something like a really, really good stainless steel fret in that position. Regardless of the others, I tend to use stainless on all of them anyway.
You're a stainless guy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love those. And so on a 0, it's quite important to have, to have a stainless there, so you don't have that wearing down or cutting grooves into the fret material.
Funnily enough, my exposure to 0 fret guitars was when I was playing in a Queen tribute show, and I got the wig, and I was Brian May, and I had a red special, and he's got a 0 fret.
That's right. Brian May did that too, didn't he?
Yeah, and you know what? He still has the original frets. So you said about it wearing out. I was really surprised to learn that he has never refretted that guitar. It's all still the original.
You're kidding. What, after all those years?
After all those years, he still has the original frets in it, including the 0 fret.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
It is, yeah. It's considering their standard nickel frets. So I was so into that, and that consistency you're talking about going from either bone or plastic to fretting, that I got an aftermarket nut that I dropped into one of my Strats. It's just behind me. If you give me 1 second. I have a 0 fret on my Richie Kotzen Strat. Don't know if people could see that, but just in front of my standard fret, there's a 0 fret there, and that was an aftermarket thing. So I am a big fan of the 0 fret, Ernie.
And a lot of my guitar designs sort of do use that, and it's an option I took when I did this particular design, which is the multiscale with the trem. I came up with this option, so I don't know. Can you see?
Sure can. I'm just going to change this shot. So
I can try and get that into the frame. So I figured, how am I going to use a locking nut and do everything? I just did this option. Basically, have the locking nut basically the same, but in front of it, in the correct position, I put the 0 fret.
Yep.
And then the locking nut position doesn't really matter. I could put that almost wherever, but I put that into what I felt was the logical position, sort of directly behind, and sort of staggered down. So I pulled the strings down over the 0 fret.
Beautiful, mate. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And that works quite okay. So that's the design I'm running with for these particular guitars.
Mate, as I said, that just played like butter. I'm not much the shred guy, little bursts, but Doug DeJong, I've seen him demoing that guitar and just absolutely going stupid with the shred. And it's just like, what even is that? And that guitar makes that possible.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that would have helped, and I don't know whether you might have clicked to it, but the actual multiscale itself would have, possibly without you even consciously sort of feeling that, I think that would have helped to make it feel like a faster playing guitar. So the combination of the low action and the ergonomics of that fretboard, I think would have been what you found as feeling quite fast and comfortable. I think.
Well, one of the people we've got in the chat is a great guitarist named Licia Louise. She's one of my favourite local players. And I know she's had issues with tendonitis over the years, and we've sort of exchanged tips and stuff. Licia, I think you need to try one of these multiscales. It might be the ticket you're looking for, just to get rid of some of those angles. Check it out.
Yeah, if I could just sort of talk about that just for a sec,
Yeah,
Greg, and
go for it.
explain a little bit more as to what's going on. What normally happens is with the fretboard, like you normally need to cock your wrist around to fret different chords and different positions, around the fretboard. But with the angling of the frets, what that seems to do is, no matter where you're playing along the fretboard, what ends up happening is that your wrist stays straight. Now, it's probably a little bit difficult for me to sort of demonstrate here just with the camera and all that, but
Yep.
let's say you're sort of playing somewhere in the middle of the fretboard where the frets are all sort of fairly well close to perpendicular. If you have a look, I'll just spin it around,
Yep.
and I don't know if you can see it, but my wrist is fairly straight. Okay, now let's say I'm playing up near the nut.
Yep.
So once again, my fingers sort of following, roughly, along the sort of angle of the frets. My wrist is still straight.
Yep.
And if I go all the way down here into the soloing area, my wrist is still straight.
Yep.
Okay, so what that means is that no matter where you're playing, up and down, you could be shredding up and down the neck, you're not having to cock your wrist in any sort of angle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is the primary thing that takes out a lot of the fatigue out of your wrist.
Okay.
So things like the tendonitis and the carpal, that's immediately reduced by a large factor.
Mm-hmm.
Secondarily, because of the angle of the frets, you tend to shift the position of where you lock your thumb in.
Yep.
So, if you're bluesy, you're going to have it hanging over the
That's
fretboard
me. That's
like
me.
that,
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, me too. That's all the older stuff.
Yep.
If you're playing faster, you tend to have it somewhere behind, sort of on the back of the neck, like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And the multiscale actually changes what you have to do there, because your wrist isn't having to cock in any certain position. So naturally, your thumb will have to move into a more comfortable position as well. And so secondarily, that's what helps to sort of reduce a lot of the fatigue during your playing.
I did find, and I am one of those thumb over guys, really badly. Like, it's not until I started seeing videos of myself that I saw that my thumb comes right over to mute the strings that I don't want to hear when I'm sort of playing in that bluesy style. The multiscale, it doesn't matter. I thought, am I going to be bound to playing thumb behind style? And no, not at all. It works on both. So yeah. Are you selling? Are you selling more multiscale guitars than actual standard these days, or is it still being discovered by people?
It's very much being discovered. I think there's a certain segment of players out there who are very familiar with it now, because of the other companies that are marketing it along with myself. We're trying to push it out there, and but it's still quite a new thing. Like going to NAMM, for instance, being there for 4 days and just the number of people coming past and looking at the guitars, and they've never seen it before. And to me, it's a surprise, because I've been into it since about 2013. So for me, it seems like forever that I've been tinkering with these things.
Yep.
But for other people, it's like the very first time they ever saw it, and so they sort of stopped by at the booth and they wanted to sit down and have a go of it, because they thought, oh wow, what the hell's that? And funnily enough, many of them sort of got it very quickly. They got it straight away. As soon as they started playing it, they go, oh right, okay, because it feels different when you're playing it. Yep. And so having said that, though, it is still fairly new. I don't think the majority of people would know much about it, or certainly haven't even tried it. So
Sure. Well, I'm a convert, mate. I'm saving my pennies so that I can grab one of your guitars.
Excellent.
Yeah, and speaking of your guitars, you do hand build a lot of your guitars yourself, but there is also an affordable line made overseas, right?
That's right, and the production line of Asian built models, that came online in about 2016, 2017, where I started getting those sort of made and guitars into stock. And I'm very happy with them. I've been building up a relationship with the manufacturer over there in Asia, and so the customers on this side have got the option of, if they want something a little bit more elaborate, then I'll make it here in the custom shop. Or you've got the option of as you said, the more affordable sort of standard lines. And I'll show you one. I've got one here.
Okay.
So this, for instance, is effectively a similar guitar. This is the Avenger.
Nice.
Okay, so It's a multi-scale, as you can see. It's a fixed bridge.
Yep.
and it's usually with a nice solid paint finish on there of various different colours. This one's sort of like a purple metallic. Don't know if you can sort of see it or if I'm getting the wrong sort of.
No, we can, mate. Yep.
Yeah, so I've got those guitars in stock. I've also got some headless guitars that I do with the Asian factory as well as in-house, obviously. But this is the headless model, what we call the MIG.
Nice. Now, I didn't quite catch. Did the previous one, the Avenger, did that have a trem or was that fixed bridge?
So that was fixed bridge.
Fixed bridge.
So that one's like little monorail saddles on there.
Yep.
And so normal setup. But on this end, as you can see, a normal sort of Graphtec Teflon nut.
Yep.
With a 0 fret. So same sort of deal. And just a fixed bridge in the form of the monorail, like single saddles.
Yeah. And how many models have you got, mate? Both in the handmade. I guess the handmade ones you can come up with whatever anybody wants, but the ones that are built overseas, how many different lines have you got? How many different models in the line?
Well, I've expanded. So most of the in-house ones, including the Katana model, which was a big model for me, was the first major 7-string baritone guitar that I was making. I've got a line of that as well, made in Asia, and I'm expanding them all at the moment, including some brand new ones. I'm doing a take on the traditional Jazzmaster style.
Cool.
Which I call the Jazz Blaster, and that's becoming very, very popular.
Nice.
And I might grab one of those. I'll show you.
Yeah, go for it,
what they look like.
Yep.
So bear with me one moment.
Will do.
Okay, back in a sec.
In the meantime, folks, I'm going to sing and dance for you because I'm that kind of guy. So, folks in the chat room, while Ernie is going to grab that, we got any questions that we can throw at him? So I can see we've got Lisa, Doug, Remco. So, folks, feel free to chuck something at Ernie. Here he comes. He's back.
All right. So we've got this fella.
Oh, look at that.
So this is as you can see, a
bound fretboard, Fluence pickups, Fishman Fluence.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Not multi-scale, no fan frets on that. That's just
no. This one's a standard. It's a baritone. So this is a 27-inch.
Nice.
7-string, as you can see.
Yep.
So that's another newish model that I'm doing, and most of those are being made at in the Asian facility. So I've got that as a new line. So I've got a number of those coming. This one's I'll string that up and that'll head out tomorrow.
Nice.
So like I say, that one, for some reason, that jazz style is becoming very popular. I'm getting a lot of requests for that. So more than happy to oblige. It's very different for me. It's such a large, strange body, and a bit different to my normal super strat type stuff.
Yeah.
But it's terrific. Love it's got a different tone, different feel to it, everything. So it's always good to try something else or put something else in the line.
Mate, I'm just having a look at your website here, and I should be able to flick it so that people can see. And I'm looking at the Avenger in Seafoam Green, and it says $8.99. So that's Australian dollars. $900 for a guitar like that plays. You'd have to play them to believe. How? How can you do that?
Well,
at that
that's
price?
it's to do with the efficiency of the Asian production line.
Yep.
Having said that, with the model, I mean that's sort of like the starter guitar for the multiscales for me.
Yep.
Okay, that's the timbers are fine. You know, it's like basswood. They're not the normal sort of traditional sort of Asian production guitars like Ibanez, for instance, use a lot of basswood and all that. So
yep.
I'm using that a nice simple maple neck. So the timbers aren't overly expensive or elaborate or anything. The hardware is relatively generic, and the pickups are generic. So everything being generic and simpler ends up with what I would try and have as a very competitive instrument out on the market.
Okay. I guess today with CNC machines and the like, you know, you could possibly send them your dimensions and everything, and it's just chuck it in there and out it comes. Are you hand shaping everything yourself, or are you using CNC yourself?
I've been using CNC predominantly since I started.
Yeah, consistency.
Pretty much started out doing a few with power tools and templates, and got bored of that very quickly. And being a bit of a tech head, always wanted. I like machinery and equipment, and anything like CNC type equipment. It's just a lot of fun as well, and so I sort of pushed myself into that very early on.
Yeah, that consistency thing. I did talk to Grover Jackson at NAMM a couple of years ago, and he said a lot of people were sort of bagging on him for going that way. No, we preferred your hand-shaped. It's like, well, no, this is consistent. Every guitar is exactly the same. Before it was hit and miss. Oh, did I get that right? So things have come a long way to make guitars affordable now, huh?
Absolutely, and it kind of does sort of bridge the gap a little bit between what can be done, for instance, in a more, let's say, expensive country like, say, Australia or America. We say, oh, it's very expensive to make stuff here. Equipment like CNC machines, 3D printers, all that sort of stuff, laser cutters, all that sort of stuff, it kind of bridges the gap because it takes a lot of the labour out. That's where the big difference is in the labour cost of stuff. And so with the right equipment, obviously it costs a bit to get that equipment, and a lot of training and practice and knowledge to use the equipment. But assuming you go through all that, it does bridge the gap and does help to reduce the labour cost side of it.
Okay, so are you a one-man show there? Like when somebody orders a custom-built one from you, are you working on it all yourself all the way? Have you got people helping you out there?
I've got some part-time help.
Yep.
Some local young fellas, young musos who love guitars and were more than keen to come and help me in the workshop. And so for a lot of the time, I've got some help in the wood shop. I'll give some of the easier jobs I can train people into, like using the planers and the sanders. Cool. and getting the blanks ready to cut the body out and the necks. Great job for the youngsters. Uh-huh. And even once I've got the body sort of cut out and all that, I can get them to help sand and hand shape the final little bits and pieces on those. And so so it's predominantly a one-man show, but with some part-time help as well.
That's great. Now you're hand doing all your frets, playing getting everything leveled and everything. You're not using a plec or anything like that.
No, and plec machines are great, but then just like a CNC, the results from that will only be as good as what the operator is able to set it up to.
I've heard some horror stories, mate. I've got one friend who had his fret job completely ruined by a plec machine. He was quite a prominent player in Australia.
And that can happen, and it comes down to the knowledge of the operator using something like the plec machine. By the same token, doing it by hand is not really a big deal. I mean, it's you've got so much control even doing it by hand. If you've got the right measuring equipment and ability to see what's happening in the neck, because every neck's a little bit different. They all have their little slight twists and turns, and so you try and compensate for that with the leveling of the frets, and you have to be very careful on how you seat them to make sure on the ends and that they're all consistently sitting on the fretboard and they're glued down and everything is done correctly.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of my guitars are in serious need of maintenance, and you mentioned before that people have sent your guitars back to you to get them playing the way they did when they left. Do you also do that for other guitars? Like if people wanted you to do a setup on another guitar that's not yours, is that a service that you offer? Or
I do a broad range of stuff. I do sort of some servicing plus paint refinishes. A lot of people come to me for to respray or do a swirl on the guitar or something like that. So I do offer those services. I'd have to say these days I probably spend more time building new models and custom orders, custom shop orders as opposed to repairs. But I do help people out with repairs, especially locally. With some people I know around here, I certainly help them out, make sure that their guitars are spick and span.
Cool. Yeah, as I said, I'm in serious need of maintenance, mate, and I think I might have to send one down to you if you've got the time. I'll check with you whether that's appropriate at the time or whether you're hard at work on something else. But,
not a problem. Yeah, I can always have a look for sure. Very
impressed with the playability of your guitars. Now, you mentioned before that you got your start doing customization to gem style guitars and building ones like that. What kind of custom mods were you putting on that to make it more your own and not Steve Vai's?
Yeah, it was more so the aesthetics. Yep. Okay, so In terms of hardware, the Ibanez Gem had great sort of pickups and hardware on that anyway. So that side of things, I didn't really want to change too much. It was more so just the general look of it, to have different color schemes, different themes to them, and a lot of people like to do that because you've obviously got the traditional Gem style guitars. You've got the Vi Gem range with all the, you've got the white one, you've got some of the Swirl ones, you've got all the different range, including the neons. If you remember those, do you remember the
original?
The green?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
The green and the yellow and the pink,
which they've just re-released. They've just re-released those, and they're back in vogue.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more sort of the aesthetics of those guitars. So I literally started just painting them, and then piece by piece I was going back until these days. These days I'm pretty much making guitars from planks of wood and fret wire, and it's from ground up.
So in terms of neck shape, is that something that you've experimented with over the years, just on your own guitars? I know there's been a few guitars I've picked up from other people lately, and I've played it and looked at the builder and said, asymmetric neck, huh? And they're like, yeah, you picked that. And I was like, yeah. Is that something you play with, or you go for the symmetry?
Yeah. Oh, look, neck profiles is one of those things that all builders really sort of tinker with.
Yeah.
Probably for their own sort of curiosity rather than necessarily for the customer. Even sometimes the customer is very definite in what they like, and it'll be either, I like a chunkier neck, or I like a really thin, fast neck, or I want one that's flat on the back, or one that's very round, or one that's asymmetrical, or one that's sort of Clapton V, or so sometimes a person knows what they really like because they're comfortable with it. Other times you sort of work in with the customer, and other times when I'm getting a chance to just play in the workshop, I'll fiddle around and see what other shape works.
Yeah. Cool, because it's also different, and it all depends on the mood as well, doesn't it? Like sometimes you can be, I'm just going to play some slow bluesy stuff. It can be a big fat neck, so trying to find something that can cater to all and actually let you rip when you want as well.
It's one of those things that it comes down to personal preference. Like a neck profile is complete personal preference. People, and it depends on how long your fingers are, how big your hands are, all that sort of thing as well.
And you adjust as well. It doesn't take long to go, oh, this is weird. Oh, this is really comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. So anywhere between like a really thin, fast neck up to a sort of a fat sort of Strat style neck, most people adjust to anyway, but they have their preferences. And the only other sort of neck, other than the asymmetrical, I mean, some people really like those because that shifts the position of where their thumb is at the back, and also how it sits in the palm. Wherever you're playing, that makes a bit of a difference there. But the one big one these days that has made a bit of an impact to the market is the Strandberg Endure neck.
I haven't tried it. I know the one.
Yeah, so that's something that Strandberg were offering as a license to other manufacturers. So you'd pay Strandberg a license fee, and then you could reproduce that neck. But they've stopped doing that as a number of years ago, and I'm not sure why. Yeah. But I ended up making a few based on customer request of that neck style.
Yeah. So if folks don't know what we're talking about, the back of a Strandberg neck it's
trapezoidal, basically.
Trapezoidal. I was going to say it's like half a hexagon, isn't it? But that would probably be trapezoidal, and it twists, doesn't it? The shape of it twists.
Correct. Yeah. The shape of the trapezoid changes, and so it's steeper, sort of up near the nut end. If you can imagine putting your thumb, just behind the fretboard, just on the back of the neck, it's sort of steeper up near the nut, and then it sort of gradually changes as it goes down towards the other end. So it's basically keeping the thumb at the right angle at the back of the neck if you're playing behind there like that.
Yeah, right. I'm going to have to try them.
Yeah. One of the prototypes that I've got, which I don't have in the workshop, I can't show you because it's with a good buddy of mine, and I don't think he's ever going to give it back to me. Actually, you'd remember him, Phil.
I was going to say, are you talking about Phil? Yeah.
I'm talking about Phil. Yeah,
Yeah.
He's not giving that back to me, so I don't think. And what it was based on it was one of the Strandberg licensed necks that I was going to make.
Yep.
As an order. However, I stuffed it up on the CNC, didn't I?
Oh.
I was able to salvage it and change the profile, so it wasn't anymore the Strandberg profile. It was something that I had to make the piece of wood work, and it ended up being like that, but as a V shape instead.
Okay.
So there's no flat spot at the back.
Yeah, right.
And that ended up, for us, actually one of the most comfortable necks ever in terms of profile.
Wow. Happy accidents, huh?
Yeah. So it was like it was one of those accidents that is almost like fate. It's like that's why Phil's not going to give it back to me. He loves it too much. He can play anything on it. It's yeah.
Have you tried to recreate it since?
No, but I'm going to try and find that CNC program that messed up and see if I can actually recreate it.
Yeah,
for sure. But because it's something I definitely want to keep and perhaps introduce if I'm not infringing on Strandberg's patent, of course. I wouldn't want to do that. If it's different to them, then I'll certainly look at it and introduce it because it is so comfortable to play.
Cool. Well, I tell you what, mate. Like, first up, I'm going to try and maybe get the funds together. Just get one of your overseas guitars and get something like that in my hands. But eventually, I'll save the coin and come and see you, and I'll actually come to your workshop and play a few different profiles and make sure I get the right one for me.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. Speaking of which, where are you located?
In the Southern Highlands, New South Wales, a town called Mittagong.
Mittagong, okay.
Yes. So near Bowral, the home of Donald Bradman.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's south of Sydney, about an hour's drive south of Sydney.
Okay. Is that anywhere near Nowra by any chance?
We're basically inland from Wollongong.
Inland from Wollongong.
Yeah.
My trusty little assistant beside me is from Nowra.
Sorry, I missed all that.
We're talking about you. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Mate, like I said, next time I'm down in Sydney, I'll come down and have a bit of a play. And just to see the actual setup, I'll bring some video gear and we'll do a bit of a tour.
That'd be great, yeah.
Yeah?
That'd be awesome, yep.
Yeah. Folks in the chat room, have you got any questions for Ernie? I'm not sure whether mine is working there or everyone's just being quiet today. That's fine. Mate, what other little mistakes did you make when you were first starting out? Like, I'm sure there's people out there going, yeah, I'm going to try and build a guitar myself. Is there a common thing that you could save some people some time and go, hey, don't make this mistake? Anything spring to mind there?
Yeah, well,
I'm gonna as you think about that, I'm gonna bring one up.
Yep.
Now, folks, if you're going to scallop your fretboard, don't take your eyes off the fretboard as you're doing it. I way back when, I've still got my first electric guitar. It's back there, and Vi was the big thing, so I tried to scallop the first 4 frets, and I simply grabbed a pen and wrapped some paper around it, and I was just doing the motion. I looked away and talked to somebody, didn't I? And then came back and went, whoa, too far. So actually, it's not on that guitar. It's another neck I have laying around. It's a bit of auto bog filler on the upper end of the fretboard. What mistakes can you help people not make that you've made? That anything spring to mind? Yeah,
well, there's a big one, and it's a fundamental thing. So, for instance, and it comes down to, like, let's say somebody wants a custom version of something. It could be anything, right? And they go, oh, instead of that bridge, can you put this bridge on it? And that's all I want. And so it should be no extra cost or anything. And it's like, what people need to understand is that even the slightest change you make to a guitar, it could have consequences that you did not expect. Okay, there's so many things that you would never have thought of, and you can completely stuff things up. And so one of the main things is, and it's something that does factor into the price of customs, is a lot of the time, especially if it's something that the builder is not sure about, you kind of have to have a practice run with like really cheap throwaway timber and test everything out first. Make sure the scale length works, make sure that there's no hidden little surprises where you think, oh yeah, that was supposed to be straightforward, but then all of a sudden it makes it so that it's impossible to play, or that it's impossible for the hardware to work for some reason. And there's bound to be all sorts of different examples, but the most common one is something like a scale length. For instance, if you're going to try and use on a certain design a different type of bridge or something, you better test it out first and make sure you do it on a piece of wood, and you even go to the trouble of stringing it up, at least the 2 outer strings or something, and you make sure that everything's working and you can get intonation and all of that, because that's a big and common mistake that people will make.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And when people are fiddling out with their own one, they'll likely just sort of make a body, for instance, because it's usually a bit easier to sort of get a lump of wood and then bandsaw it out and put a template around it and sort of shape it even by hand or something. Definitely practice beforehand and make sure you've got everything. And certainly before painting, like even once you've made the body, bolt it all up, put the hardware on, put the strings on, make sure it's all going to work, then paint it. And don't paint it and then discover that you've got to reroute parts of it or something.
Yeah, sure. So speaking of woods, do you have a preference for woods, and have you experimented with any Australian woods? Is there a particular wood in Australia that is a good as a tone wood? Do you actually believe in tone wood? It's such a hot debate. I know.
You had to ask that, didn't you?
Yeah, I had Frank Falbo and Remco on here early on in the piece, and Frank would just laugh at the suggestion of tone wood. But mate, I've got a right beside me. There's an Ash Stratocaster. That's a basswood Stratocaster. There's an older one back there, and all those things that they say about the sound of those particular woods, you can hear that acoustically. My older Strat, which is traditional type of wood, just has a strong mid-range about it, and you can hear it without being plugged in. The Ash Strat just there has no mid-range. It's all about the low and the top end. The basswood one I have there, it plays great. I'm not 100% happy with the sound. I'm going to play with some different pickups and things. But and
look, my take on that is
I was just talking acoustically, by the way, then, that not through pickups.
Okay, that's why I was going to go on to the next stage of that, which would have been, you can get any of those guitars, and once you plug it in and you put some processing through it or some sort of gain or distortion, the apparent differences are sort of reduced quite a bit. Okay, so in terms of a recording scenario or even playing through an amp, it's probably not quite as obvious. But acoustically is where you do feel the difference. You know that there is something happening, that the timbers do affect it in some way or another. And it's not to say that timbers are either good or bad. It just depends what you're after. You can use a really light timber like basswood, but what you can then expect is that even though it's going to have resonance, it's going to take out some of those frequencies. It's going to take out the top and the bottom. It's going to be very sort of flat across the board on the EQ in terms of what the strings are doing. The body itself and also the neck timbers, they dampen. So all you can ever do with a guitar is subtract from the initial ringing of the steel string. Okay, so the perfect situation would be a very hardly bolted down situation with a steel string there, and then you get all the energy out of it and all the normal frequencies of the metal. Then once you put it onto a guitar with all sorts of different materials, all sorts of different woods and all that, all of those tend to subtract from that. They take out some of the frequencies.
Okay.
So all you can ever do from a guitar is subtract away from the initial energy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So,
absolutely. And you know what? That's not such a bad thing. I do a lot of mixing for people, and some people go, man, how'd you get it to sound like that? What did you add? Well, no, I just took out what was bad. So subtractive, and I guess looking at a guitar in that way kind of makes sense.
And so I am a believer in tone woods. I'm not obsessed by it either. But I do, after a number of years' experience and trying so many different timbers and different configurations or geometries of those timbers and all that, you can't help but sort of pick up the differences between them, and also find patterns. Like, for instance, American Ash has just such a distinctive feel and resonance. You said you had an Ash Strat there.
It is so heavy, and I've I've customized this a lot. This was a Richie Kotzen Stratocaster. It was a puke yellow. I think it was a take on a Mary Kay finish, but it turned out yellow. I stripped it. The neck here, I took out a whole bunch of wood there just from photos. The Guthrie Govan, sort of did all that. I've taken a lot of weight out of this, and the first thing anybody says when they pick this up is, "Whoa, how heavy is that guitar?" But it has those characteristics of Ash that they say Ash has, and it just has a a bloom around the front end of the note on this guitar
Yes.
that none of my other guitars have, and it's a dynamic thing that there's a transient around the front end of the note.
Yes, yeah, and that's a really good way to describe it as to how it's really the dynamics of what the string does after you've plucked it, and what the timbers tend to do, and what they're actually subtracting from the string initially.
Yep.
Like some timbers will immediately sap a lot of the energy out of the string, and some of the frequencies will disappear out of the string. In other cases, like ash, for instance, it keeps some of those. It just reflects some of those frequencies and keeps them strong within the string. It just keeps it vibrating in some way. Other timbers do different again. Like, for instance, you've got that whole Les Paul type thing with the mahogany body and neck. And that's a very, very real thing. You can't deny that. It's like the mahogany will tend to take out some of that top end ring, some of that high frequency. It just takes it out, and it just absorbs that very quickly, but then keeps the lower and mid frequencies going more so.
Absolutely.
And it's just something that's very obvious. Now, on a solid body electric guitar, it's not quite as obvious, but the example I often use with people is on an acoustic guitar, try and tell me that different sort of timbers that you can't, even an untrained ear, even a person who's not musical, they can tell the difference, they can hear the difference on an acoustic guitar.
It is striking. I mentioned Lisia's in the chat room there. I did some recording with her probably about a year ago now, and we rounded up about 10 acoustic guitars from various friends. And if you look around, people are surprised. I don't own an acoustic guitar, and I always tell them, because a good acoustic is $5,000 plus. And I've got friends that have those who trust me enough to lend me them when I need them. And so we rounded up a few, and my friend Link has a Koa Taylor acoustic guitar. There is just a whole octave of frequencies, not notes. Everyone thinks I'm talking about notes. I'm talking frequencies of low end on that guitar that no other guitar has. You feel it resonating. And then some of the other guitars have got very pronounced mid-range to it, and it's all the woods, isn't it? And construction.
Oh, yeah, look, obviously construction's got a lot to do with the bracing inside that you don't see, and how that's all put together underneath the thin top on an acoustic. However, let's take the same model guitar, but in a certain range done by any of the main sort of acoustic manufacturers, and then they've actually got the different models within that same, or the different versions within that same model, where, okay, you've got one with a spruce top, and then you've got another one that's sort of more cedar based with the back and sides, and maybe a cedar top, and then another one that's got more sort of rosewood in there on the top or on the sides or something. You can tell the difference on the same model. And so for me, it's the same principle with electric guitars, but the effect isn't quite as strong as that. It's just it's a lot more subtle than that, but it's still there. Like and it's as you were saying before, like acoustically, when you first fiddle around with a solid body electric acoustically, you can tell that there's a bit of a difference. And it's like when you're playing it, it's just how it feels up against your belly. It's different, how it's resonating and vibrating and all that. And you can certainly tell on the final thing with distortion and all that. Look, you may not be able to tell as much. And people do all these sort of frequency tests, and, look at the spikes on this are the same as this wood and that wood. Well, yeah, it's going to be, because you're not really measuring the timbre as such. You're just measuring, what the output of the guitar is in a different way. So I am a believer in tone, but I don't obsess over it.
Yeah, sure. So as an experiment, I still have my very first electric guitar. What's the body and neck of it? I did so much of it over the years, not knowing what I was doing. But 13-year-old kid, I want to put a humbucker in this. I don't have a chisel. Let's use a screwdriver, and it's a real mess. But it's a plywood body. Yeah. I've got a couple of nice bridges to put on there. I've got a Godot 510 and a Wilkinson. I'm going to try and round up some other stuff and actually put some good hardware on that guitar, which I know is plywood, and just see if I can get it sounding good, just to see.
I can guarantee you will. Absolutely. I mean, even the plywood, it will certainly, it'll have its own resonance, and you'll certainly get a decent sound plugged in with it. Guaranteed. Guaranteed.
I was pleasantly surprised when I first met Remco. He had some brass blocks for Floyd Rose, and he wanted to hear the difference in sound on those, or sustain. So we did a bit of a controlled experiment. I said, mate, we'll do that. You come here and do the changing of the bridge, mate. I'm not interested in doing that. You do that. He said, yeah, cool. So with the standard block on a Floyd Rose, recorded that just to hear it, see how long the sustain, etc. Did the same thing with the brass block. there was no difference. I'm trying to remember what the results were. There was no difference in sustain. Everyone talks about brass, the sustain. And that was exactly the same. Tonally, there was a big difference. It was a lot mellower. It just didn't have that zing across the top end.
Yep.
So there are different things. We're talking about woods. Well, we got this wood and it's a bit too bright. Put some brass on it, you know?
Yep.
So it's very... You tweak it. It's a synergy, isn't it? We're just talking about the setup of a guitar being a synergy of multiple things. I think the sound is as well.
Yeah. And what you would have been seeing there, I remember the test actually. That was, about a year ago, was it?
A bit more, mate.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I remember the test that you guys did, and what it comes down to the same sort of thing, and it comes like especially with parts of like metallic components on hardware, it comes down to the metals being used, and because all metals have got different densities, haven't they? So some like aluminium, for instance, is a lot lighter, therefore the transmission of sound through it is going to be a touch slower than a much denser metal.
Mm-hmm.
So then brass, for instance, is a little bit denser, actually quite a bit denser than aluminium. So therefore, the sound's going to travel through it in a different way. And then going further along, any of the steel or stainless steel type parts are going to be denser again on top of the brass. And so you've immediately got like a chain of different materials of different densities that will then transmit the sound differently. Uh-huh. And so that's what you would have been seeing. So in terms of the sustain, that probably would have been the same, but in terms of the frequencies, it would have been different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now you said about different woods subtracting from the tone. At the guitar show, a few booths down from you was a chap that had aluminium body guitars. They were just basically a shell. The outline of one, I forget the name, and all aluminium fretboard, etc. Whole guitar was aluminium, and he's have a play, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to sound great, and it actually did. I was surprised at the sustain of it all and everything. So yeah, I think a few experiments on my end to see if I can tell the difference, not just acoustically, but actually plugged in. I do notice fretboards. So I'm a fan of maple fretboards. Don't know if it's in my head. It just has more of that transient around the front end of the note that I was talking about. Yep. And I've put that in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, down to rosewood being a lot more, it's not dried out as much as maple. Maybe that's soaking up some of the energy. What is it I'm hearing? What do you think? Or am I just full of shit?
No, I think you're right. Even the fretboards do have a bit of a difference. And that comes down to because the string is making contact with the fret, you're pushing down on the fret, which is then in direct contact with that nice big strip of timber that's on the neck, in the form of the fretboard. So that has to make a bit of a difference in terms of how it's subtracting some of the frequencies out of the string and the string energy that it's reducing. So the timbers are a little bit different. For me, my favourite is probably ebony. I really like it.
Me too.
Yeah, I quite like it. Maple's quite good, but you're right. For whatever reason, it stays bright. The higher frequencies seem to stay in the string, and that gets transmitted down to the bridge, and then the pickups will sort of register a different energy from the strings. So maple probably pulls out some of the lower end. Rosewood does the opposite. It pulls out more of the higher end and keeps some of the lower frequencies active in the string vibration.
Okay. Do you offer bolt-on and neck-through designs, or you?
I do mostly bolt-on, to be honest, with some set necks. I've done a few neck-throughs, but for me, my favourite is bolt-on, to be honest.
Same.
It's a little bit selfish on my part because obviously in terms of the manufacturing process, it's much better. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the final result, in terms of the response of the guitar, I like the bolt-on better than a neck through anyway because the dynamics of it are different.
Yep. That
I don't know. Have you? What's your experience with it?
Well, that whole transient thing around the front end of the note, I put a lot of that down to a bolt-on. That Les Paul sound where people say, "Oh, it has so much more sustain than a Strat." No, it just doesn't have that initial transient around it. Yep. I've seen visual waveforms, much like the test that we did with Remco's brass block, and Les Pauls just don't have that pop around the front end of the note, that transient, and I can hear that straight away on recordings, people go, oh, that's a Les Paul. I go, how can you tell? And it's just like, well, it just doesn't have that initial transient around the front end of the note, which disguises itself as being more sustained, but I don't actually think it is.
No, I think you're spot on there. And like a neck through, for instance, is different again, because you've literally got that one whopping great piece of timber that goes from the headstock all the way down to the end of the body. Okay, that's all the one piece of timber. And so you've got that effect of it's a lot more a consistent vibration that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on a bolt-on, you've got two completely separate parts. You've got a neck that's its own thing, own timbers, and you've got a body, and they've got this interface where you bolt the two together. And so when you've got a vibration, you've got a vibration happening in the neck. It's transferred from the strings down through the fret or the nut, down into the neck piece. And then at the bridge end, you've got the vibrations then transferring into the body. And then as the vibrations go backwards and forwards between the two, they meet at that interface between the neck and the body. And then sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And then often the time when they don't, that actually gives that, I'm not even sure what the right word would be there.
Dissonance, yeah.
Dissonance, where they're not going to cancel each other out. They're going to actually, in some cases, amplify each other a little bit. But in either case, you're going to have a more dynamic response from a bolt-on because of what the frequencies are doing. They're not actually often cancelling each other out. They're actually bouncing off each other.
Yep.
Whereas on a set neck, because you've got that hard gluing between the two, you've got less effect of that. And then on a neck through, you don't have any effect of that because all the vibration is consistent all the way from one end of the guitar to the other. And so some people like that. They like that smoothness of the thing. Other people like the dynamics of that dissonance between the neck and the body on a bolt-on. And that's what I like. I like that slight chaos there that's happening. I've
seen Steve Vai being asked about why Evo, his number one, why you're using that all the time. And I've seen him pick it up, tap the neck, tap the body and go, listen, same note.
Yeah.
So he's got the necks and body matched in frequency to resonate together in sympathy with each other. So, and I guess I'm not sure if people have experienced this, but with an acoustic guitar, somebody can be beside you and play their D string, and if you're in tune with them and you've got an acoustic beside you, look at your D string. It's being activated just through sympathy, the airwaves. I picked up on that as a kid, and perhaps that's what we're talking about in the body woods resonating together or clashing and bringing up that dissonance, which bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit made a career out of that sound. Yeah. How about fret wire, mate? We talked about you're a fan of stainless steel. Now, I'm not sure if people are hearing that ding as people are texting me that's coming through there. I've turned that off. Are you hearing a sound in frets, the difference between the stainless steel and nickel?
Yeah, it comes back to what we were sort of talking about before, to do with, the properties of the metal itself. And so stainless steel being harder and denser than nickel steel, you have to get a different performance. And so with the stainless, they do tend to be a little bit brighter.
I can hear that, yep.
So you can definitely get that when you're...
in person. I don't know whether I could hear in a recording, for instance. I have seen people do it, like the guys at Warmouth, Aaron at Warmouth, Aaron Cheney. Check out Tone Talk. Aaron did a great little interview with them recently. Aaron does little comparison tests where he gets exactly the same hardware and basically reconstructs the guitar, but just swaps out the body or a different neck with stainless. And I could hear it in those blind tests. But man, it's splitting hairs. It really is. Like seriously, just a millimeter adjustment on your amp will make up for it. So
yeah. Exactly. So in terms of a difference in tone and all that, I wouldn't be too worried about the differences between the fret materials. It's more what feels good. And obviously with stainless steel, I mean, it's got the huge benefit of its wearing ability, where it doesn't wear much. It takes a long time to get little pitting marks under the strings on stainless frets. I mean, they'll stay bright and shiny and unmarked for quite a long time. in comparison to other softer materials. But I mean, by the same token, other people like nickel frets or even older, softer frets than that. You know, like some of the old acoustics, for instance, they're made with brass almost, or copper or something. I don't know. They're really, really soft fret wire. And, you know, some people like that. Some people like that bit of resistance when you're playing. So when you're bending, you feel that resistance. Whereas with stainless, you got virtually no resistance. I mean, it's very, very slick when you're bending on a stainless fret. Some people like that. Yeah, that resistance to bending plus that slight warmth. I guess you'd have of the nickel fret. In comparison, especially more vintage players. Like I know I did a refret on a old Les Paul for a local guy a while ago, and I was explaining to him the differences, and you know, I'm not trying to talk him into the stainless, but I suggested it to him, and he says, "Nah, you know what? I mean, because he goes, oh look, I'm an old guy anyway, and these frets will see me through. I'll just can we keep it this with what I'm used to and what I like and all." I said, absolutely, no problem at all.
Yep.
And he's comfortable with his nickel frets on his Les Paul, and that's great. You know.
Cool. There is a cool question here, Ernie, that I'm just going to drag onto the screen here. It's from Sean Zimmerman, and he says, why do hollow bodies seem to have more feedback than a regular solid body electric if tone woods don't matter to a pickup? Just wondering your and Ernie's opinions. I don't think that's so much to do with the tone wood, but rather it being an acoustic amplifier of energy, really. I don't know how to put it into words. Maybe you might be able to explain to Sean.
Yeah, not so much to do with tone woods. It's more that whole feedback loop thing. So when you've got the you've got the volume of sound coming from the amplifier, and then it's coming back through and into the main chamber of the hollow body guitar, it starts to resonate the body, which then puts back more resonation back into the bridge and then into the strings. And so you got that feedback loop where just the sheer energy of the sound coming from the amp actually keeps the strings ringing further and give more energy to the strings. It's almost like a sustainer type thing happening.
That's totally that thing I was talking about, where if somebody's got an acoustic beside you and they play their D string and you're perfectly in tune, how it would treat.
Exactly.
That's the same thing. Yeah, it's ringing.
Spot on, yep.
The airwaves are triggering it. It's vibrating in sympathy with the other one. So it's the same kind of thing, but just a lot louder, and therefore creating a loop, and off she goes. So
absolutely, yeah. So that's why you have to put you have to mute the strings, because literally the strings want to vibrate because the whole body, because of its properties as a hollow body, it just picks up the sound waves from the amplifier, doesn't it? And then that has to transfer into the strings, back into the strings. So that's what I see anyway.
Yeah, Australian woods. I know I asked that. I've got my eyes on a million things. Forgive me if you've answered that already. You use many Australian woods in the designs?
Some, not a lot. I know some other Australian builders, they have a theme of using Australian timbers and this and that.
That'd be acoustic guys. There's a guy here, Aaron Fennick, and he's very big on Australian tone woods for his acoustics. Yeah, just wondering.
That's great. When it comes to electrics, the main one that I've used, and I do like it, is Australian Blackwood.
Okay. Yep.
That one, but it's a strange one because it is very variable. Even though I'm not obsessive about tone woods, I've just noticed such a big variation with Blackwood. I mean, I've had ones that behave like a really bright sort of ash, and I've had others that behave like the darkest mahogany. It's just there's such a big variation with Australian Blackwood, and it's maybe just to do with the species and just how different they are and where they grow and all that. I don't really understand, but that's just I just find that to be a very variable thing. And so whenever someone says, "Oh, I want this sort of I want it to be bright in terms of its tone and all that," with Blackwood, I can't predict it. I don't know, because it's not a consistent wood. Whereas other ones like ash or sapelli, the African mahogany, they're very consistent. Each piece that you get, how it's going to behave roughly.
Mm-hmm. I've seen videos where people have made guitars out of ramen noodles. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
The guy puts it in on fiberglass, and it sounds like a guitar. It doesn't sound like something made of noodles.
Once again, it's you're getting the properties of probably the resin casting more so than the noodles.
Yeah,
themselves,
totally.
Totally. So you can make a a guitar body out of anything. You can make it out of a lump of aluminium. You can make it out of a lump of acrylic. Like those clear BC Rich guitars, for instance. Those.
I remember the
those
ones.
clear plastic ones. They weigh a ton, don't they?
They do. Ampeg made them as well back in the day. But yeah. The old ones I saw were made by Ampeg. I was like, a bass amp company making these, yeah.
So you can make it out of that. You can make it out of fiberglass. You can make it out of all sorts of different things. So long as it doesn't kill so long as you don't make it out of something like rubber, because that would absolutely kill the resonance straight away. You just wouldn't get any, you wouldn't get much luck with that, I don't think. But anything that's a hard material that can transmit sound or sound vibration, it's probably no drama.
Well, let's think about the Van Halen album 5150. There's a few songs in that where he's using a plastic guitar, essentially. Carbon fiber being the Steinberger. I don't listen to that album and go, oh, geez, the guitar tone's a bit different on this one. He's got that Magic Marshall, and I think that takes over any influence that the body might have. That's a very humbucker sound. This is something that I've said before. You might correct me if I'm wrong, but in my opinion, if I'm using a single coil pickup and I'm driving an amplifier, I hear more of the guitar. It sounds woodier. I hate to use that word, but it's like I can hear more of the wood. I know I'm probably not. Whereas when I'm using a humbucker and it's pushing the amp harder, I tend to hear more of the amp. Just a small observation I've made. Is that something that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think so. I think with the humbucker, because you've got the more windings, there's more. It's behaving in a stronger way. I think, you described it well. I think you are hearing a lot more dynamics as such anyway.
So I noticed, having a look at your website, etguitars.com, yeah?
Yes.
It's not a .au, yep. That there were some older pictures there of guitars with Seymour Duncan Invader pickups in it, which was, at the time, I'm not sure if they still are, the highest output passive pickup available. And I gotta say, I went down that road originally with my burnt Strat, which is up behind me there somewhere. I've had so many things in it. It wasn't all that. I thought, high output. No, I've gone back and tried a bunch of different things, and I have a Kinman P90 style in there now. It looks like a single coil size, but sound of a P90. That's got the best of the both worlds there. Just that drive, but still that earthiness about it, I'm finding. Yeah. Are you... do you have a preference for any particular type of pickup in your designs?
I'll start with the generics that I have, because obviously my production line, I've got a bit of a selection and an offering and an ability to have some customized pickups. So I've spec'd out some pickups in my range.
Yep.
And funnily enough, I do have within that range a Invader style that I don't often use anyway.
That might have been what I saw.
That would have been it. So in the Avenger range, that is one of the options as a generic. There's also your typical Alnico 5 type magnet humbucker. That's along the lines of your standard sort of PAF type humbucker. And then you've got the more sort of modern pickups with the sort of like a ceramic magnet that have a little bit more harshness to it, let's call it, or a little bit more extra clarity and a little bit more punch. So I've got those generics that I put into the Avenger line and also into like the new Jazz Blaster line, 6 or 7 string pickups. So I've got those available. A lot of the time, the clientele that I have, they are quite sort of familiar with their pickups anyway. They seem to have their favourite pickups regardless.
Okay.
And so I cater to a lot of the metal boys, for instance, and they're obviously huge bare knuckle fans. They've got their favourite bare knuckle, and when they're speccing out a guitar, they'll include that or perhaps a Duncan. So I'm finding these days the most popular, probably bare knuckle. The Fishman Fluence range is becoming very, very popular.
Mm-hmm.
They're rivaling pretty much the bare knuckle now in terms of. And I'm speaking about my range, or the ones that I would be familiar with,
yep.
Or putting out in my customs and production line ones. After that, probably a few Duncans, and then a few other lesser known, more boutique brands.
Yep.
But yeah, so bare knuckle and Fishman are the big ones at the moment. Most people seem to be speccing those, and like I say, most of my customer base, they kind of know their pickups anyway, so they'll spec it out already as to what they want in there, and it obviously helps to have them factory installed, either from a custom build here, I'll put them in for them, or even when I get the OS stuff, the production line stuff in from Asia, I'll then put in their favourite pickup into that OS build.
Is it fair to think of pickups as being the final filter on the guitar? So to use a different analogy, a speaker cab on an amplifier, it radically change it. Or if you were to be editing some video and at the very end you just throw a filter on the whole thing, you go, because the whole thing was just a bit too bright, let's put this on, and that darkens it. Can you think of your pickups in that way as well? I've got this guitar, it's just too bloody twangy. The final thing that's going to influence the sound, well, let's try some not so bright pickups. Is that a good way of thinking things?
Yeah, I think so. Because obviously pickups are different. Like on an electric guitar, we're talking before about the tone woods and sort of the effect on that. Obviously, and you'd probably agree, the pickups make a vaster difference to the sound coming into your amp than any tone would in your guitar. So certainly, and that stands to reason because of the way the pickups are designed and how they're wound and so forth. They will have to, just by nature of how they're built, they're going to have to provide a different output and a different sound going to the amplifier, for sure. So they're very, very critical in that.
Now, you mentioned along the way a couple of guys that are endorsing your guitars. I'm assuming Australian artists, or have you got any guys overseas? And is there who should we check out that's playing some of your guitars? Yeah,
okay. So I've got a lot of the young metal guys, and I'll go through a quick list. So starting with some of the metal boys in Melbourne, we've got a band, Zeolite. So check them out.
Yep. How do we spell that? Do you know? That's a...
Yep, ZEO.
Yeah.
LITE.
ZEOLITE. I'm going to check them out. Yep.
That's Grant and Pat down in Zeolite.
Yep.
We have Gravemind down in Melbourne as well. And one of their guitarists, Michael, is using our Avenger and Katana. Up in Newcastle, we have Hamish, who uses... he's got a few of my guitars now. I think he's got a Katana, an Avenger, and a Jazzmaster now, Jazz Blaster style.
Yep.
And he's in a couple of projects. The newest one, which I'll plug for him, is called Faith in Lies, I believe, is his new project.
Okay.
So check them out. They're about to release some really cool new stuff. Going back down to Melbourne, we've got a young teenage band, actually, which was one of my first endorsees, young Ed Warren in Ironstone.
Okay.
And you really need to check them out because they're about to do a release in next week, actually. Their first EP.
Nice.
So I really want to plug them as well.
Yep.
There is also Brock in the band, his new band, End of Days, down in Melbourne as well.
Okay. So you've got a few guys out there. Mate, Ernie, I want to just bring up one thing before we round things up, and that is your logo. You've got a seriously cool logo on the headstock of your guitars, man.
I don't mind it either. Yeah, it's fairly distinctive, and there is a little bit of a story behind that.
Do you care to tell us that story?
Yeah, I don't mind. A while ago, I had one of my customers actually come to me, and he says to me, "Look, don't take this the wrong way, but you sort of seem to be catering for the metal boys a lot, but your logo kind of isn't. Maybe you should think about something a bit cooler or a bit more sort of, because your logo's not really doing it." And I didn't take it the wrong way. I thought that was really good, constructive feedback.
You got to listen to the feedback. Yep.
Absolutely. And he said, you got to be a bit cooler than what you're doing. And okay, fair enough. But kindly enough, he suggested, he goes, look, him and a mate of his are graphic designers, and do I mind if they just threw a couple of ideas at me? I said, of course, no worries. And he said, look, you don't need to take our ideas or anything, but we'd be happy to sort of help and try and come up with something that might look cool. And so they threw a few things at me a week later or something, and immediately they were onto this like theme of like incorporating the ET initials in the form of a sword or a weapon. And because I mean, a lot of my models have got kind of that sort of a theme.
Katana
the name of the model itself has kind of got like a weapon theme for whatever reason. It just sort of ended up that way. And they came upon one particular design, and I saw it straight away because it had the within the okay, so here it is. Anyway, if you can see it there, that's the
Yep.
Yeah,
it's a little bit low. It was just undershot, but we get the idea.
Yeah, so it looks like basically like a sword, and the E part makes up the handle of the sword, and then the crossbar sort of guard on the thing is the T. And when I saw that, I thought, yeah, great. And then I just modified it a little bit, and they helped me with that. But it effectively has stuck since then. It's so simple, but identifiable, and I really liked it, and I think a lot of people do like it because it's simple and it's very identifiable.
Well, the classic thing was when I was down at the Melbourne Guitar Show, and you, Phil, Remco, and myself were all having a beer. I got a text from a chap saying, "Hey man, make sure you drop in and say g'day to Ernie from ET Guitars for me." And I texted him back and said, "You're shitting me, mate. I'm having a beer with him right now." And he's like, "Oh, I designed his logo." So I assume that's who you were talking about when you said the couple of guys.
Absolutely, that's Joseph and his buddy. They were kindly came up with that for me, and it's great how that sort of thing happens. And it's not just the logo. There's a number of other things like that where customers have come in and helped with that. Also with things like suggestions for models or suggestions to modifications to various models or various things. A lot of the feedback you get is from the customer base or from close friends who are also customers or whatever, and a lot of that feedback is so important and critical, and I listen to all of it because so much of it is so valuable. Things like this, from Joseph, I mean, the idea for the logo, and if he hadn't have come forward and mentioned it and then spent that time to actually to do that, I may have not even looked at it for a long time.
Yep.
It's one of those things. And some of these new models, like the Jazz Blaster style, it came from customer requests. I mean, the whole Multiscale thing was driven a lot by the customers. Another new one, which I haven't mentioned at all, was I've done a Multiscale take on an Explorer type design.
Oh, yeah.
And as a 7-string, and so it was basically the boys from Gravemind and Zeolite. They said, they kind of almost dared me. They said, do you want to try and do a Explorer with a big reverse banana headstock on it as a 7-string baritone? I said, that sounds stupid. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And and that's quite a good one, and that's available now as well as a design. So
you've got to listen. You got to listen to the people. They got the ideas. Well, look at Leo Fender. Couldn't play a lick, but he had the engineering capabilities and listened to what people wanted instead of forcing on them. This is what you want. No, you tell me what you want. So
and that's a big part of it. And you kind of it's not a case of you have to listen. It's a case of it's just so important to mesh in, because I mean, if it comes down to only my personal tastes, it'd be like a 6-string Multiscale, and that'd be about it. Maybe with a trem, and then so much else that would be possible wouldn't be possible, because I'd be constricting it just purely to what I like, and that's not how it should be. I mean, I'm here to sort of help out others, and that's why it's critical to take on all their suggestions and have a good think about it and all that. I mean, and another one was with the Multiscale. Some of the boys from down in Melbourne, they were saying, "Oh, look, we owned a Multiscale from another brand, but we're finding it hurts our hands because the fan is too big."
Okay. Yep.
But we're playing yours here at the Melbourne Guitar Show, and it's like, it feels great. So our suggestion would be, I mean, in order to get our lower tunings, can we do the same kind of fan or the same angles on the fan, but just make it bigger, like a more baritone, just so we can get to a drop F or drop F sharp sort of area on a 7-string. And so I thought, I'll help them out with that, sure, and so I did that, and that's added to the range now. It's added a longer Multiscale, but with quite a comfortable ergonomic fan. You know?
Nice. So have you gone much down the road of more than 7, like 8 strings and the like? Have you experimented?
Yeah, I've
with
got eight strings available.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And including 8-string multiscales as well.
Okay. I'm actually very keen to try an 8-string, but tune it a little differently. You're not bound to what you're supposed to do with it. So I was thinking, if I had an 8-string, how great it would be to tune it to standard, but have the 2 lower pitch strings as a bass E and A string. Be able to do some slapping. The width would be a bit hard, but do some slap bass and then be able to do some funk chords in between. That's something I want to try out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Mate, we got some really nice feedback from Gabor at the super fun, awesome, happy time pedal show, which is a great little YouTube show worth checking out. And he's just said that I just checked out the ET Guitars website and they look great. I really like the headless thing lately. The MIG looks awesome. So Gabor's
I appreciate that.
yeah. He's got a great little show there. Him and Alex, they do that from the Sunshine Coast, but they get international recognition. I actually met him in Germany last year at a YouTube event.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, very funny to meet up on the other side of the world and go, hey man, we only live an hour or 2 away from each other. But yeah, absolutely classic. Ernie, thank you so much for your time, mate. I told you it goes quick. We've been at it for an hour and a half now, mate.
There you go.
Yeah. And as I said, mate, I'm definitely going to save my pennies and get a beautiful creation from you. I'll talk further about some custom options and the like. So etguitars.com. I do believe there's like a custom order form on there. If you've got any custom desires on your guitar, talk to Ernie about it, and I'm sure he could do it for you. Ernie Taylor, thank you very much, mate.
Thank you, Rick.
And folks, we will see you again. Who have I got on tomorrow? We've got Thomas Blug from Blue Guitar on tomorrow, who makes an absolutely amazing floor amp. If anybody's interested in not lugging around their big gear anymore and having a pedal board basically with an amplifier built into it, tune in tomorrow. That's going to be later on the day. I'll send some reminders out on the social media. But once again, thank you very much, Ernie, and see you folks. Where's my end screen? There it is.